Now that lockdown restrictions are beginning to ease, we're getting to see people we've been separated from for a long time. Just a few weeks ago, the schools went back and you got to see your friends and your teachers again. I wonder if any of them look a bit different to before. Maybe they're taller. One or two of them might have, shot up. Perhaps they've got a new hairstyle. With hairdressers and barbers being closed, some people have tried to do their own hair with disastrous consequences. Some people's hair, like mine, just got really long. And some people's, well, I've noticed that some people's hair is a bit less, shall we say, colourful, slightly greyer, perhaps. You might be forgiven for not actually recognising your friends when you first saw them. Perhaps mistaking them for someone else, a stranger, perhaps. For some of Jesus' followers, this is exactly what happened to them. On Friday, we heard in our story from Chris that Jesus had been arrested, put on trial and sentenced to death on a cross. Maybe a cross a bit like this. After his death, his body was taken and put in a tomb. It was sealed with a huge rock and protected by Roman guards. For many folk, they quite literally thought that Jesus was dead and buried and that the story had come to an end. Jesus' friends and family would have been absolutely heartbroken. Why? Well, God had told them that Jesus was going to save them from darkness and he would give them a way of putting things right with him. But now that plan was in tatters as Jesus' broken body lay in a tomb. After 3 long days of sadness, Jesus' friends were mourning over his death. They went to his tomb to tend it. But when they got there, they found that it was empty. The stone had been moved away, and inside, where Jesus had been, there was nobody. Mary went in, and she could see that the white cloth that Jesus had been wrapped in was there. She sat down, and she could see there were 3 men, brilliant in white. They were angels. And one of them turned round and said to her, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen." Risen? She thought to herself. And then she remembered something that Jesus had said, that he would be raised on the 3rd day. Could it be true? All sorts of possible explanations crossed her mind. Perhaps he'd been stolen. Perhaps he'd not really been dead and he'd escaped. Perhaps someone was playing a cruel trick. But this was God at work. And inside, she knew it was true. Full of excitement and joy, she got up and ran off to tell everyone else what she'd found. Jesus' friends were absolutely devastated. So a couple of them decided they'd go for a good long walk from Jerusalem down to Emmaus, about 7 miles in all. While they were on the road, another guy joined them. It was Jesus, but they didn't recognise him. They couldn't tell who it was that was with them. Not very clear why they didn't recognise him. Maybe he looked a bit different. Maybe he spoke differently. Whatever it was, they were so caught up in their sadness that they just couldn't see what was going on before their eyes. Jesus said to them, "What is it that you're talking with one another about as you go along the road?" And they told him all about what had happened to their friend, how they'd had all these great hopes for the future, but that everything had been lost, that their friend had died, and that it couldn't be true what they'd been hoping for. They reached their destination and they still hadn't recognised him. So I reckon Jesus was probably really enjoying the fact that they hadn't recognised him. They got into the house, I guess, and sat down and they were talking, and Jesus was finding out more from them about what had happened. And then, as they sat down to share a meal, there came a big reveal. If you remember, Jesus had a meal with them the previous week. They'd sat down and they'd broken bread, and Jesus had blessed the bread and said thanks to God for it. And as he did that this time round, they realised who he was. You can just imagine, can't you, their gasps of surprise and laughter as they realised that they'd been walking along with and having a massive conversation with a person they thought was a stranger, and really it was their friend. They were absolutely just beyond delighted. So the moral of the story is that even when it seems like Jesus might not be with you, God's always with us. If you can't see God around you, there's probably something that you're not quite getting. Jesus is always with us. Jesus is alive.